It is a spiritual, it is a moral deficit in our country. And you see that with abortion. There is a link between killing 50 million children and the economic difficulties we're experiencing as a country. Did you know there's one study that says if those 50 million children that had been murdered since 1970, if they'd been allowed to live and grow into productive citizens, they would have added anywhere from $35 to $70 trillion to our gross national product. If those 50 million children who were murdered in the womb had been allowed to live, had they been paid into our tax system, there would be no Social Security crisis. There would be no Medicare or Medicaid crisis. What we are reaping right now is what happens when you kill 20% of your population. There are great economic repercussions from violating God's rules. But those economic repercussions pale in comparison to the spiritual repercussions that we're experiencing. All you have to do is look in history and see how God has dealt with nations in the past that sanctioned the killing of its children, to see what God is going to do to America. Think about Israel. Do you realize Israel was only the only real nation that could ever say it was chosen by God? Only Israel was truly God's chosen nation. But Israel engaged in child sacrifice to the pagan god Moloch. And when you read the details about what those child sacrifices entailed, they read eerily similar to partial birth abortion when you read how they sacrificed children. What did God do to His own nation, Israel, because of what they did to children? He raised up the pagan Babylonians and the Assyrians to take His own people captive. In more recent times, think about Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany took children to the crematoriums by the trainloads. And God raised up the Allied forces to crush Nazi Germany. Is it really any question about what God's going to do to America when America violates one of God's most basic laws? Thou shalt not murder. The third explosive decision is one that occurred just a few years ago, actually. It was the Supreme Court decision called Lawrence versus Texas. It was a case that struck down our state's anti-sodomy laws, but it had far more reaching ramifications. During that ruling, the minority dissent led by Judge Anton Scalia said, "This ruling today leaves on pretty shaky grounds all laws that are banning same-sex marriage." And what Justice Scalia predicted 9 years ago, we're seeing come to pass now. I believe probably in this Supreme Court session, I'm going to predict you may see the Supreme Court rule that the Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional. I think it's only a short time until the Supreme Court is going to declare all state laws banning same-sex marriage as unconstitutional. You say, well, why should God's people be concerned about that? I mean, if homosexuals want to go out and get married, why is that any skin off of our nose? Why can't people do what they want to do? No, all we have to do is look at other countries that have legitimized same-sex marriage, and we see exactly what's going to happen. The Hoover Institute did a long-term study of Scandinavian countries that had legalized same-sex marriage, and here's what they found over a 10-year period of time. They found that not that many homosexuals actually went out and got married, even after it became legal. But what they found over 10 years was the rate of heterosexual marriages dropped precipitously. People quit getting married. They just started living together more and more. And the reason is simple. If marriage is whatever you say it is, if it can be a man and a woman, or two men and two women, or three men and one woman, if marriage is whatever you want it to be, why bother to get married anyway? I mean, when you counterfeit something, you cheapen the real thing. And what these countries have seen is what we're starting to experience, the fallout that comes from no more marriage. When you raise children without their biological fathers and mothers, there are severe sociological repercussions. Children who do not live with both biological parents are more prone to depression, to drug abuse, and even to suicide. Now, it's not always possible, we understand, for children to live with both of their parents. Death, divorce, desertion sometimes intervene. But the point is, government ought to encourage that relationship rather than discourage it by counterfeiting what God has ordained as marriage.